The blizzard had stolen everything from Clara Whitmore in a single merciless night, leaving her with nothing but the worn dress on her back and frostbite creeping through her toes as she stumbled through snowdrifts toward the distant lights of Salt Lake City. The December wind of 1881 howled around her like a living thing, hungry and vicious, and she wondered with each labored step if this white wasteland would become her grave. She had left her small homestead cabin 20 miles east that morning to trade her winter vegetables in town, never imagining the storm would sweep down from the mountains with such fury. Now, as darkness fell and her limbs grew heavy with cold, she could barely make out the shapes of buildings ahead through the driving snow. Her husband had died of pneumonia the previous spring, leaving her alone to work their modest claim. She had managed through summer and fall, proud of her resilience, determined to prove she could survive without anyone's help. But winter in the Utah Territory was unforgiving, and the storm had destroyed her cabin while she was gone, collapsed the roof under the weight of snow and wind. She had returned to find her home in ruins, her stored food buried and ruined, her livestock scattered or dead. With no family and no money for lodging, she had set out for Salt Lake City with only the desperate hope that someone might show mercy. Clara's legs gave out just as she reached the outskirts of town. She fell forward into the snow, her vision blurring, her body too exhausted to rise. The cold no longer hurt. That frightened her more than the pain had. She closed her eyes, thinking of her mother's face, of her husband's smile, of all the people she would soon join in whatever lay beyond this frozen earth. Strong hands lifted her from the snow. She heard a man's voice, deep and urgent, though the words seemed to come from very far away. Then warmth surrounded her, the heat of a body pressed against hers, and she was moving, being carried through the storm. She tried to speak, but her lips would not obey. Consciousness slipped away like water through her fingers. When Clara opened her eyes again, she found herself lying on a bed near a roaring fireplace. Heavy quilts covered her body, and she could feel the blessed warmth seeping back into her frozen limbs. The pain came with the warmth, sharp tingles in her fingers and toes, and she gasped. "Easy now." That same deep voice spoke from nearby. "You are safe. The frostbite is not too severe, but it will hurt as you warm up." She turned her head and saw him for the first time. He sat in a wooden chair beside the bed, a man perhaps 28 or 30 years old with dark brown hair that fell nearly to his shoulders and serious gray eyes that watched her with concern. His face was weathered from outdoor work, his jaw strong and covered with several days of stubble. He wore a simple cotton shirt and dark trousers, and she could see the shape of broad shoulders beneath the fabric. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "My home, about 2 miles outside Salt Lake City proper." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I was riding back from town when I saw you fall. You are fortunate I decided to leave when I did, or you would have frozen to death within the hour." Tears stung Clara's eyes. The reality of how close she had come to dying crashed over her like a wave. "Thank you," she managed. "I have no way to repay you. I do not want payment for saving a life." He stood and moved to the fireplace, ladling something from a pot that hung over the flames. "What I want is for you to drink this broth and tell me how you came to be walking alone in a blizzard." As Clara sipped the warm, savory liquid, she told him everything. The words spilled out in a rush, months of loneliness and struggle finding voice at last. She told him about her husband's death, about working the homestead alone, about the storm destroying her cabin and leaving her with nothing. She told him about her failed attempt to reach town before dark, about giving up hope in the snow. He listened without interrupting, his gray eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her heart beat faster despite her exhaustion. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "My name is Harrison Jameson," he said finally. "I run a horse ranch here, breeding and training for the Army contracts and local buyers. I lost my wife and infant son to cholera 3 years ago, and I have lived alone since then." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You have nowhere to go, and winter has only just begun. My hearth is yours as long as you need it. Stay here until spring comes and you can decide what to do next." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "You would let a stranger stay in your home for months?" "You are a woman alone who nearly died because she had nowhere else to turn. What kind of man would I be if I sent you back out into the cold?" Harrison's voice was firm. "I have a spare room where you can sleep. The house is large enough that you will have your privacy. I ask nothing from you except perhaps help with cooking if you are able. I am tired of my own poor attempts at meals." "I can cook," Clara said quickly, "and clean and mend and anything else you need. I will not be a burden to you, Mr. Jameson." "Harrison," he corrected. "And you could never be a burden. Now rest. You have been through an ordeal and your body needs time to recover." Over the next few days, as the blizzard continued to rage outside, Clara discovered that Harrison Jameson was a man of his word. He treated her with unfailing courtesy, never presuming or making her feel uncomfortable. The house was indeed large, a solid 2-story structure built of wood and stone, clearly designed to withstand the harsh Utah winters. Her room on the second floor overlooked the barn and corrals where Harrison kept his horses, and though the furniture was simple, everything was well made and clean. As her strength returned, Clara insisted on taking over the household chores. She cooked hearty meals from the well-stocked pantry, baked bread in the cast-iron stove, and mended tears in Harrison's work shirts. It felt good to be useful, to have a purpose again. And if she was honest with herself, she enjoyed Harrison's company during their meals together. He was a quiet man, thoughtful and steady, but when he spoke, his words carried weight. He told her about his horses, about the satisfaction he found in training a difficult animal, in seeing something wild learn to trust. He spoke of his late wife Margaret with gentle sadness, never bitter, only acknowledging that grief was part of loving deeply. Clara found herself sharing her own memories of her husband Peter, of their brief happy years together before illness took him. "Do you think it is possible to love more than once?" Clara asked one evening as they sat by the fire after dinner. The question had been on her mind for days, though she had not intended to voice it aloud. Harrison looked at her thoughtfully. "I think the heart is more resilient than we give it credit for. My wife would have hated the thought of me closing myself off from life because she was gone. She was always telling me I was too serious, that I needed to laugh more." A small smile touched his lips. "I think she would have liked you." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "I think Peter would have liked you too. He always said the measure of a man was in his kindness to those who could not repay him." Their eyes met across the space between their chairs, and something unspoken passed between them. The moment stretched, filled with possibility, and the first tentative stirrings of something neither was quite ready to name. The blizzard finally broke after 4 days, revealing a world transformed by snow. Harrison needed to check on his horses, many of which had sheltered in the far pastures during the storm. Clara insisted on coming with him, bundled in one of his heavy coats and wrapped in scarves. The cold was fierce but no longer deadly, and the sky was a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds. Snow crunched under their boots as they walked toward the barn, and Clara could hear horses whinnying in greeting as Harrison approached. She watched as he moved among the animals with easy confidence, checking each one carefully, speaking to them in low, soothing tones. There was something almost beautiful in the way he worked, a quiet competence that made her feel safe. "This is Ranger," Harrison said, stroking the nose of a large chestnut gelding. "He is my best breeding stud, smart, strong, and even-tempered." The horse nuzzled his shoulder affectionately. "And this troublemaker is Juniper." He indicated a dappled gray mare who was trying to nibble on his coat buttons. "She is too clever for her own good." Clara reached out tentatively to touch Juniper's soft muzzle. The mare's dark eyes regarded her with what seemed like curiosity. "She is beautiful." "She was my wife's horse," Harrison said quietly. "Margaret spent months training her. After she died, Juniper would not let anyone near her for weeks. She grieved, too." Clara understood the weight of that statement, the trust Harrison was showing by allowing her near something so precious. She ran her hand gently along Juniper's neck, and the mare lowered her head, accepting the touch. They worked together for hours that day, feeding and watering the horses, mucking out stalls, checking for any injuries sustained during the storm. Clara had grown up around animals on her parents' farm in Missouri, and the work came naturally to her. Harrison seemed pleased by her ease with the horses, and they fell into a comfortable rhythm, working side by side with few words needed. As January gave way to February, a routine established itself. Harrison rose before dawn to begin work with the horses, while Clara prepared breakfast and tended the house. They ate together in the morning, speaking of their plans for the day, then parted to their separate tasks. At midday, Clara would bring food out to wherever Harrison was working, and they would eat together, talking about everything and nothing. Evenings were spent by the fire, sometimes in companionable silence, sometimes in deep conversation that stretched long into the night. Clara found herself watching Harrison more than she should. She noticed the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the strength in his hands as he worked, the rare but genuine smile that transformed his serious face. She noticed how he always served her first at meals, how he made sure her coat was hanging near the fire to stay warm, how he listened when she spoke as though her words truly mattered. And Harrison, though he tried to hide it, was watching her too. Clara would catch him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, something tender and yearning and sad all at once. When their hands accidentally touched passing dishes at dinner, he would pull back quickly, as though burned. The tension between them grew like a living thing, sweet and terrifying. One evening in late February, a neighbor stopped by. Thomas Sterling was a rancher whose property bordered Harrison's to the north, a stocky man in his 50s with a booming voice and curious eyes. He had heard rumors in town about Harrison taking in a woman, and he had come to see for himself. "Harrison, good to see you," Thomas said heartily, though his gaze kept sliding to Clara. "And who might this be?" "Clara Whitmore," Harrison said, his voice carefully neutral. "She was caught in the December blizzard and nearly froze. She has been helping with the household while she recovers." Thomas's eyebrows rose. Nearly 3 months of recovery. That must have been quite an ordeal. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks at the implication in his tone. "I also lost my home in the storm. Harrison has been kind enough to allow me to stay until I can make other arrangements." "I see." Thomas's expression was skeptical. "Well, you know what people will say, Harrison. A widower and a widow living alone together. It does not look proper." "I do not care what people say," Harrison replied, his voice hardening. "Clara needed help and I provided it. Anyone who wants to make something ugly out of an act of charity can come discuss it with me directly." Thomas held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I am not judging, friend. Just warning you. You know how tongues wag in town. I would hate to see either of you face difficulties because of gossip." After Thomas left, an uncomfortable silence settled over the house. Clara felt guilt gnawing at her. She had been so grateful for Harrison's kindness, so caught up in the strange new feelings growing in her heart, that she had not considered how their arrangement might damage his reputation. "I should go," she said quietly. "Find work in town, somewhere to live. I never meant to cause you problems." "No." Harrison's response was immediate and firm. He crossed the room to stand before her, his gray eyes intense. "You are not causing me problems. Thomas Sterling can think whatever he wants, and so can the rest of the town. You have nowhere to go, Clara. I meant what I said. My hearth is yours as long as you need it. But your reputation means nothing compared to doing what is right." He reached out as if to take her hand, then stopped himself, his arm falling back to his side. "Please stay." The raw emotion in his voice made Clara's breath catch. She saw in his eyes what she had been feeling herself, the connection that had grown between them, fragile and precious. "I will stay," she whispered, "as long as you want me here. Then you will be here for a very long time." The words were barely audible, but they settled into Clara's heart like a promise. March brought the first signs of spring, though snow still covered the ground and frost still painted the windows each morning. Harrison had a contract to deliver 6 trained horses to the army post in 2 weeks, and he spent long hours working with them in the corral. Clara would stand at the fence watching him, marveling at his patience and skill. One afternoon, a horse spooked during training, rearing up unexpectedly. Harrison moved to calm it, but the horse's hoof caught him on the shoulder, sending him stumbling backward. Clara was over the fence in an instant, running to him without thought for her own safety. "Harrison, are you hurt?" She knelt beside him in the mud, her hands on his face, his shoulders, searching for injury. He looked up at her in surprise, then his expression softened. "I am fine. Just knocked the wind out of me." His hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his shoulder. "You should not have climbed in here. The horse could have hurt you too." "I do not care. I saw you fall and Clara stopped, suddenly aware of how close they were, of his hand warm over hers. "I was frightened. Clara." Her name on his lips was like a prayer. His free hand rose to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away mud she had not realized was there. "These past months with you here, I have felt alive again. I swore I would not burden you with my feelings, that I would let you have time to heal and decide your own future. But seeing you run to me just now, the look in your eyes, tell me," Clara breathed. "Please tell me what you feel. I am falling in love with you." The words emerged rough and honest. "Perhaps I already have fallen. You have brought light back into this house, warmth into my life. When I think of you leaving, of this place without you, it feels like dying." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "I love you too. I have been so afraid to admit it, even to myself. It seemed too soon, too impossible. But my heart knows what it wants, and it wants you." Harrison pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her as though he would never let go. Clara buried her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, leather and hay, and something uniquely his own. They stayed that way for a long moment, holding each other in the spring mud while the horse grazed peacefully nearby, the danger forgotten. That evening, Harrison formally asked Clara to marry him. There was no ring yet, no elaborate proposal. They sat by the fire as always, but now Harrison took her hand openly, lacing his fingers through hers. "I know we have only known each other a few months," he said. "I know people will say we are rushing. But I am 30 years old, Clara, and I have loved and lost before. I know the difference between infatuation and something real. What I feel for you is real. I want you as my wife, not just as someone staying in my home. I want to build a life with you, a future. Will you marry me?" Clara's heart felt so full she thought it might burst. Yes, 1,000 times yes. She leaned forward and kissed him, their first kiss, tentative and sweet and full of promise. Harrison deepened the kiss, his hand moving to cradle the back of her head, and Clara felt heat bloom through her entire body. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I will go to town tomorrow and speak to the pastor. We can be married as soon as you wish." "Soon," Clara said. "I do not want to wait." They were married 1 week later in a simple ceremony at the Salt Lake City church. Clara wore a new dress purchased from the general store, pale blue with white lace at the collar. Harrison wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes never leaving his bride's face. Thomas Sterling attended along with a few other neighbors, and if there were those who gossiped about the hasty wedding, neither Clara nor Harrison cared. When Harrison carried her over the threshold of their home that evening, Clara felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged. This man was her future. Their wedding night was gentle and passionate by turns. Harrison was patient, attentive to her needs and responses, and Clara marveled at how natural it felt to be with him, how right. Afterward, lying in his arms in the bed they would now share every night, she felt tears of happiness slip down her cheeks. "Are you all right?" Harrison asked, concern in his voice. "I am more than all right." Clara smiled up at him in the lamplight. "I was just thinking about that night in December when I fell in the snow. I thought I was dying. I never imagined that losing everything would lead me to find you, to find this life. I am so grateful." Harrison kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You saved me as much as I saved you. I was barely living before you came, just going through the motions. You reminded me what it means to be alive, to hope for the future. I will spend every day trying to make you happy, Clara. I promise you that." "You already make me happy," she whispered, "just by being you." The weeks that followed their wedding were perhaps the happiest of Clara's life. Spring truly arrived, bringing green grass and wildflowers and longer days. She and Harrison worked the ranch together, equal partners in all things. Clara proved to have a gift for training horses, particularly the skittish ones. Her gentle patience where Harrison might use firm discipline created a balance that produced excellent results. The army was so pleased with the horses Harrison delivered that they contracted for a dozen more, to be ready by autumn. Money was coming in steadily, and Harrison talked about expanding the herd, maybe building a larger barn. Clara loved hearing him make plans that included her, loved the casual way he now said "we" and "our" instead of "I" and "mine." In June, Clara realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another few weeks to be certain before telling Harrison. He was working in the barn when she found him, grooming Ranger in preparation for breeding season. "Harrison, I need to tell you something." She clasped her hands together, suddenly nervous despite her joy. He looked up immediately, reading her tone. "What is it? Are you unwell?" "No, I am very well, better than well." She took a deep breath. "I am with child." The currycomb fell from Harrison's hand. For a moment he simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a smile broke across his face, transforming it with pure joy. He crossed the space between them in 2 long strides and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet. "A baby," he breathed. "Clara, we are going to have a baby." She laughed and cried at the same time, holding him tight. "Are you happy?" "I know we have not been married long. Happy does not begin to cover it." He set her down carefully, as though she had suddenly become fragile china. "You have given me everything, Clara. A home that feels like a home again, love, and now a child. I did not think I would ever feel this complete." They told Thomas Sterling and the other neighbors at church the following Sunday. The news seemed to soften even the most judgmental tongues. A baby was a blessing, a sign of new life and hope. The women offered advice and offers of hand-me-down baby clothes. The men clapped Harrison on the back and teased him about sleepless nights to come. As summer progressed and Clara's belly began to swell, Harrison became almost comically protective. He insisted she stop helping with the heavy ranch work, worried she would injure herself or the baby. Clara protested that she was perfectly healthy, but she secretly loved his concern. She had been alone for so long that having someone care so deeply about her welfare still felt like a miracle. In August, a band of outlaws passed through the territory, robbing homesteads and small ranches. Word spread quickly, and the local men formed a watch to patrol the area at night. Harrison joined reluctantly, not wanting to leave Clara alone, but knowing he had a duty to help protect their community. The third night of the patrol, shots rang out from the direction of the Sterling Ranch. Harrison and the other men rode hard toward the sound, arriving to find the outlaws attempting to steal horses. A brief gunfight ensued. Harrison took cover behind a water trough, firing carefully, his military training evident in his calm precision. One of the outlaws went down, wounded in the leg. The others fled, abandoning their injured companion. The wounded man was taken into custody by the territorial marshal who arrived the next morning. No one from the community had been seriously hurt, though Thomas Sterling had taken a graze to his arm. The danger passed as quickly as it had come, the outlaw band moving on to easier targets elsewhere. But the incident shook Clara. She had stood at the window of their home that night, hearing the distant gunfire, not knowing if Harrison would return. When he finally rode up in the pre-dawn light, dirty and exhausted but unhurt, she threw herself into his arms and sobbed with relief. "I could not bear to lose you," she choked out. "Not now, not when we have so much to live for. You will not lose me." Harrison held her close, his hand gentle on her swollen belly. "I promise I will always come home to you and our child." As autumn painted the mountains gold and red, Clara's time drew near. The local midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Hennessy, stopped by regularly to check on her. Everything appeared normal and healthy. The baby was active, kicking strongly enough that Harrison could feel it when he placed his hand on Clara's stomach in the evenings. They had turned the small room next to their bedroom into a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow and building a cradle from pine wood. Clara sewed tiny gowns and blankets, marveling at how small they were, how perfect. Harrison carved a rocking horse, sanding it smooth and painting it with careful detail. They were ready. Clara went into labor on a crisp October morning. The pain started slowly, just a tightening in her back that gradually moved to her belly. By midday they were coming regularly, and Harrison rode to fetch Mrs. Hennessy. The midwife arrived calm and efficient, taking over the bedroom with practiced ease. Harrison paced downstairs, useless and anxious, listening to Clara's cries from above. The hours crawled by. Evening fell, then full night. Mrs. Hennessy came down once to report that everything was progressing normally, but it was Clara's first baby, and these things took time. Harrison could only nod and continue his pacing. Finally, near midnight, he heard a different sound. A baby's cry, strong and angry. He took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into the bedroom without knocking. Mrs. Hennessy looked up from where she was washing something small and pink in a basin. "Congratulations, Mr. Jameson. You have a son." Harrison barely heard her. His eyes were locked on Clara, who lay in the bed looking exhausted and more beautiful than he had ever seen her. She held a tiny bundle wrapped in a white blanket, and she was crying and laughing at the same time. "Harrison, come meet your son." Her voice was hoarse but filled with wonder. He crossed to the bed on shaking legs and looked down at the baby in her arms. His son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face and tiny fists that waved in the air. He was the most perfect thing Harrison had ever seen. "Can I hold him?" he asked. Clara carefully transferred the baby into his arms, showing him how to support the small head. Harrison looked down at his son and felt his heart crack open with a love so intense it was almost painful. This tiny person was part of him and part of Clara, a miracle made of their love. "What should we name him?" Clara asked softly. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Harrison thought of his own father Henry, a good man who had taught him about honor and hard work. He thought of Clara's father Charles, who she had described with equal love. And he thought of new beginnings, of the gift he had been given. "Henry Charles Jameson," he said, "if that suits you, it is perfect." Clara reached up to touch his face, then their son's tiny hand. "Our Henry, Mrs." Hennessy left the next morning after ensuring Clara and the baby were both healthy. Harrison barely left their sides for the next week, helping with everything, learning how to change diapers and marveling at how such a small creature could have such powerful lungs. Clara recovered quickly, blooming in her new role as mother, and Harrison fell even more deeply in love with her, watching her nurse their son. The next 5 years passed in a blur of joy and hard work. Henry grew from a colicky infant into a curious toddler who wanted to be wherever his father was, helping with the horses even though his help mostly consisted of getting in the way. The ranch prospered. Harrison's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and he had more business than he could handle. They hired a young man named Daniel to help with the work, and he built a small cabin on the property for himself. In the spring of 1884, Clara gave birth to twin daughters. They named them Rose and Lily, sweet girls with their mother's green eyes and their father's serious expressions. Henry was fascinated by his new sisters, always wanting to hold them and tell them stories in his 3-year-old babble. The house rang with noise and laughter. Harrison would come in from work to find Clara nursing one twin while Henry climbed on her back and the other twin wailed from the cradle. And instead of chaos, he saw only abundance. This was what he had dreamed of during those dark years after his first wife died, though he had thought he would never have it again. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Harrison took Clara to dinner at the finest restaurant in Salt Lake City. They had left the children with Mrs. Hennessy, who adored them and welcomed any chance to spoil them. It was the first time they had been truly alone together since the twins were born, and they savored it like wine. "You ever think about that night I found you in the snow?" Harrison asked over dessert. "All the time," Clara admitted. "I think about how close I came to dying, to never knowing any of this. It terrifies me, honestly, how much of our happiness depended on you riding home that particular night, on you looking in the right direction at the right moment. I think we would have found each other somehow." Harrison reached across the table to take her hand. "Some things are meant to be," Clara smiled, squeezing his fingers. "You have given me everything I could ever want. A home, a family, love. I wake up grateful every single day." "You gave me the same," Harrison said seriously. "I was alone in that house, alone with my grief and my horses, and I did not even realize how empty my life had become until you filled it. You saved me, Clara, as surely as I pulled you from the snow." They walked home through the spring evening, hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing the way they had when they first met. The mountains loomed dark against a sky full of stars, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. It was the same landscape that had nearly killed Clara 5 years ago, but now it felt like home. Beautiful and harsh and perfect. When they reached the ranch, Harrison pulled Clara close under the porch overhang. "I love you," he said, tilting her face up to his. "I will love you until the day I die, and if there is anything beyond that, I will love you there too." "I love you too," Clara whispered, and kissed him with all the passion of those early days when their love was new and terrifying and wonderful. The years continued to roll by, bringing both challenges and triumphs. Henry started school in town, riding in each morning with his father and returning in the evening full of stories about his lessons and classmates. The twins grew into energetic 5-year-olds who kept Clara running from morning to night. Harrison expanded the ranch again, buying adjacent land from an elderly neighbor who was retiring to live with his son in California. In 1889, a drought struck the territory. The summer was brutally hot and dry, the worst in memory. Water became precious. Harrison and Daniel spent long days hauling water from the creek to keep the horses alive. The grass died back to brown stubble. Several smaller ranchers went under, unable to sustain their herds. Clara watched Harrison come home each evening exhausted and worried, saw the lines deepen around his eyes. She did what she could to ease his burden, managing the household accounts carefully, making their supplies stretch, keeping the children occupied so he could rest. At night, she would massage his tired shoulders and remind him that they had weathered storms before, that they would weather this one too. The drought broke in September with a series of tremendous thunderstorms. Rain poured from the sky for 3 days straight, flooding the creek and turning the ranch into a sea of mud. But when the clouds finally cleared, green shoots appeared in the pastures, and the world seemed to exhale in relief. They had made it through. That winter, Henry turned 10 years old. He was growing tall like his father, all long legs and big feet he had yet to grow into. He was good with the horses, showing his father's patience and his mother's gentle touch. Harrison began teaching him the finer points of training, and Henry absorbed every lesson with intense focus. "He will be a fine rancher someday," Clara observed one evening, watching father and son work together in the corral. "If that is what he wants," Harrison replied, "but I will support him in whatever he chooses. I want him to have opportunities I never had." "You turned out pretty well," Clara teased, poking him in the ribs. Harrison caught her hand and pulled her against him. Even after 8 years of marriage, the spark between them had never dimmed. If anything, it had grown stronger, deepened by shared history and the life they had built together. "I had some excellent help," he murmured, kissing her soundly. The twins giggled from where they played nearby, and Henry looked over and made a disgusted face. "Do you two have to do that all the time?" "Yes," Harrison and Clara said in unison, which made Henry groan and the twins giggle harder. In the spring of 1890, Clara found herself pregnant again. The news was both joyful and daunting. She was 33 now, not exactly old but not young either for childbearing, and with 3 active children already, the thought of starting over with a newborn was exhausting. But when she told Harrison, his face lit up with such pure happiness that her concerns melted away. "Another baby," he said wonderingly. "Clara, how did I get so lucky? This pregnancy was harder than her previous ones." Clara tired more easily and suffered from nausea that lasted well beyond the first few months. Harrison hired a woman from town, Mrs. Patterson, to come help with the housework and children several days a week. It eased the burden, though Clara chafed at needing assistance. "You need to rest," Harrison insisted when he found her trying to scrub the kitchen floor one afternoon. He bodily picked her up and carried her to the sofa despite her protests. "The baby needs you healthy, and so do I. Let Mrs. Patterson handle the cleaning." "I am not an invalid," Clara grumbled, but she settled against the cushions with a sigh of relief. "No, you are the most stubborn woman in Utah territory," Harrison said affectionately. "It is one of the things I love about you." The baby came in late November, another son. They named him Thomas Peter Jameson, honoring both their neighbor Thomas Sterling, who had become a good friend over the years, and Clara's late husband. Clara felt no jealousy about the latter, which spoke to how secure their love had become. Peter had been part of Clara's past, but Harrison was her present and future. Little Thomas was a calm baby, much easier than Henry had been. He nursed well and slept in long stretches, which Clara appreciated given how tired she was. The other children doted on their new brother. The twins would sit beside his cradle for hours, singing to him and making faces to try to get him to smile. Henry was protective, always wanting to hold him and showing him his carved animals. "Our family is complete now," Clara said one evening as she and Harrison stood over Thomas's cradle watching him sleep. "4 beautiful children, a thriving ranch each other. I could not ask for more. Neither could I." Harrison wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. "You have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams." The 1890s brought prosperity to the Jameson Ranch. Harrison's horses were sought after throughout the territory and beyond. He made a name for himself breeding animals with excellent temperament and stamina, perfect for ranch work and long-distance riding. Money was no longer a concern. They were able to afford luxuries that would have seemed impossible in those early years. New furniture and store-bought clothes, and even a piano that Clara learned to play, filling the house with music. But the true wealth was in their family. Henry grew into a responsible young man, taking on more duties around the ranch and proving himself capable of running it someday. The twins were bright students, voracious readers who pestered their parents with endless questions about everything. Thomas was a happy child, always laughing, always finding joy in simple things. In the summer of 1895, the entire family took a trip to California to see the ocean. They traveled by train, which was an adventure in itself for the children. Henry was 14 now, trying to act grown-up but unable to hide his excitement. The twins were 11, chattering nonstop about all the things they would see. Thomas was 5, small for his age but with a spirit that made up for it. Standing on the beach with waves crashing at their feet and salt spray in the air, Harrison pulled Clara close. The children were running up and down the sand, shrieking with laughter as the water chased them. "Thank you," Harrison said quietly. "For what?" Clara leaned into his warmth, watching their children play, "For everything. For surviving that blizzard. For letting me bring you to my home. For agreeing to marry me. For these children. For 14 years of happiness." His voice grew thick with emotion. "I had resigned myself to loneliness, Clara. I thought the best parts of my life were behind me. Then you fell in the snow in front of me, and everything changed." Clara turned in his arms to face him. Her hair was streaked with silver now, and lines marked the corners of her eyes, but to Harrison, she was as beautiful as the day he first saw her. "The winter left me homeless," she said softly. "You said your hearth was mine as long as I needed it. You saved my life that night, Harrison, but you did so much more than that. You gave me a reason to live. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again. You gave me this family, this beautiful life." "My hearth will always be yours," Harrison said, echoing those words from so long ago. "For as long as we both shall live." They kissed there on the beach, with the Pacific Ocean roaring beside them and their children playing nearby, and Clara felt the same rush of love she had felt that first time in the mud of the corral. Some things never faded. Some loves only grew stronger with time. The train ride home was quieter, the children exhausted from days of adventure. They slept in a tangle of limbs while Clara and Harrison sat up talking, planning the future. They discussed expanding the house to give the twins their own rooms now that they were getting older. They talked about saving money to send Henry to college if he wanted to go, though he seemed content to stay on the ranch. They dreamed about grandchildren someday, about growing old together surrounded by family. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I had ridden home a different way that night?" Harrison asked. "If I had not seen you fall?" "Sometimes," Clara admitted, "but not often." "What is the point of dwelling on roads not taken? We found each other, Harrison. However it happened, whatever luck or fate or divine intervention brought us together, I am grateful for it every day." "So am I." He kissed her hand. "So am I." The years rolled on in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. There were birthdays and holidays, weddings of neighbors and funerals of friends who had grown old. Thomas Sterling passed away in the winter of 1898, and Harrison served as a pallbearer, honoring the man who had been one of his first friends in the community. Life continued, relentless and beautiful in its passage. In 1900, Henry announced his intention to marry Sarah Thompson, the daughter of another local rancher. Harrison approved of the match. Sarah was a sensible young woman, raised on a ranch like Henry, able to handle the hard work and long hours. The wedding was held at the Jameson Ranch in June, with half the county in attendance. Clara cried happy tears watching her eldest son exchange vows. Henry was 22 now, a man in his own right, though she still saw glimpses of the little boy who used to follow his father everywhere. Harrison stood beside her with his arm around her waist, and she knew he was feeling the same bittersweet mixture of pride and nostalgia. "We did well with him," Harrison whispered in her ear. "We did well with all of them," Clara replied, looking at the twins who were serving as bridesmaids, beautiful in their matching dresses, and Thomas, who was trying his best to stand still as a groomsman despite being only 10 years old. Henry and Sarah built a house on the far end of the ranch property, and Henry took over most of the day-to-day operations, allowing Harrison to slow down. At 50 years old, Harrison's body was beginning to show the wear of decades of hard physical labor. His knees ached in cold weather, and his back troubled him some mornings. But he was healthy and content, happy to spend more time with Clara and let his son carry the heavier burden of running the ranch. In 1901, Sarah gave birth to a daughter, Margaret Rose. They had chosen the first name in honor of Harrison's first wife, which touched him deeply. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Harrison marveled at how life came full circle. This tiny girl carried the name of the wife he had lost nearly 30 years ago, but she was part of the family he had built with Clara. There was poetry in that, a sense of healing and continuity. Clara was a devoted grandmother, often walking over to Henry and Sarah's house to help with the baby. She sewed tiny dresses and knitted blankets, just as she had done for her own children. Watching her rock little Margaret to sleep, Harrison fell in love with her all over again. She had always been beautiful to him, but there was something about seeing her with their grandchild that made his heart swell. The twins both went to college, which was unusual for girls but something Clara and Harrison had always encouraged. Rose studied literature and became a teacher in Salt Lake City. Lily pursued medicine, determined to become a doctor despite the obstacles women faced in that field. Harrison and Clara supported both their dreams, proud of their daughter's ambition and intelligence. Thomas, the baby of the family, showed an interest in law. He was a thoughtful boy who liked to argue both sides of any question, always seeing nuances and complexities. Harrison suspected he would go into politics someday, which both excited and worried him. But that was years away. For now, Thomas was still in school, still their little boy. In the spring of 1905, Harrison took Clara on another trip, this time to San Francisco. It was just the two of them, a second honeymoon of sorts. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate at elegant restaurants, and walked the hilly streets hand in hand like young lovers. On their last evening, they stood at the top of Telegraph Hill watching the sun set over the Pacific. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and gold, breathtakingly beautiful. 24 years, Clara said wonderingly. Has it really been that long since we married? 24 years since we married, Harrison corrected. But we have been together since the winter of 1881. That is nearly a quarter-century, Clara, the best quarter-century of my life. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I was just thinking about that night you found me. I remember the cold, the exhaustion, the certainty that I was going to die. And then your hands lifting me, your voice telling me I was safe. You were my miracle, Harrison. You were mine, he replied. I had given up on happiness, on love, on having a family. Then suddenly there you were, and my whole world changed. Do you think we get more than one great love in a lifetime? Clara asked. It was a question she had wondered about over the years but never quite voiced. Harrison considered carefully. I think we can love more than once, but each love is different. What I felt for Margaret was real and deep, and I will always honor her memory. But what I feel for you is different, Clara. It is not better or worse, just different. You have been my partner in a way I never experienced before. We built this life together from nothing. Every day with you has been a gift. I feel the same way. Clara turned to face him fully. Peter was my first love and I cared for him deeply. But with you, I found a connection I did not know was possible. You are my best friend, my lover, my partner in all things. I cannot imagine my life without you. You will never have to, Harrison promised, and kissed her as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. They returned home to find that Sarah was expecting again, and one of the neighboring ranches was for sale at a price too good to pass up. Henry wanted to expand their holdings, and Harrison agreed it was a smart investment. The Jameson Ranch was becoming an empire, one of the largest and most successful operations in the territory. But success and wealth, while nice, mattered far less to Harrison and Clara than the family gathered around their dinner table each Sunday. Henry and Sarah and their daughter Margaret, now a precocious 4-year-old. The twins, home visiting from their respective cities, full of stories about their work and lives. Thomas, shooting up in height and turning into a handsome young man. This was what mattered. This was everything. In September of 1906, Sarah gave birth to twin boys. They named them Harrison and Peter, honoring both grandfathers. Clara laughed when she heard, saying that Sarah must be a glutton for punishment taking on twins. But she was there to help, drawing on her own experience raising Rose and Lily. As Harrison held his namesake grandson, he reflected on how much his life had changed. He was 56 years old now, a grandfather 3 times over, with silver threading through his dark hair and deep lines etched in his face. But he felt young when he looked at Clara, young and blessed and grateful beyond words. That winter was mild, allowing Harrison to spend more time working with the horses he loved. He was training a particularly difficult stallion, a beautiful black animal with speed and strength, but a stubborn streak a mile wide. It reminded him of himself in younger days, proud and resistant to control. He was working with this stallion one February afternoon when he felt a sharp pain in his chest. It was sudden and fierce, stealing his breath. He stumbled, falling against the corral fence. The stallion shied away, frightened by his sudden movement. Clara saw him fall from the kitchen window and ran, her heart in her throat. She found him leaning against the fence, his face pale, one hand pressed to his chest. "Harrison." She was beside him instantly, holding him up. "What is wrong, my chest?" he gasped. "Hurts." Clara shouted for Daniel, who came running from the barn. Together they helped Harrison into the house and onto the sofa. Clara sent Daniel racing to town for the doctor, while she loosened Harrison's collar and held his hand, trying to keep the terror from showing on her face. The pain gradually subsided, leaving Harrison weak and shaken but alive. By the time the doctor arrived, he was breathing easier, insisting he was fine. But the doctor's examination was thorough and his expression grave. "Your heart is strained, Mr. Jameson," Dr. Williams said bluntly. "You need to stop working so hard. No more physical labor, no more training horses. You need rest and quiet if you want to avoid a more serious episode." Harrison started to protest, but Clara cut him off. "He will do exactly as you say, doctor. Thank you for coming." After the doctor left, Harrison tried to argue. "I am fine. It was just a momentary pain, probably indigestion from lunch." "Do not lie to me," Clara said, her voice shaking. "I saw your face, Harrison. You were terrified and so was I. You heard what the doctor said. You need to take care of yourself. I cannot just stop working. The ranch will be fine. Henry and Daniel can handle the day-to-day operations. You can supervise, give advice, but no more physical labor." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Please, Harrison, I cannot lose you." "Not now, not after everything we have been through together." Harrison pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You will not lose me. I promise I will be more careful." True to his word, Harrison stepped back from the hard work of the ranch. It was not easy for him. He was a man used to being active, used to working with his hands. But he saw the fear in Clara's eyes whenever he so much as lifted something heavy, and he forced himself to accept the limitations his body now imposed. He spent his time teaching Thomas about ranch management, sharing the knowledge accumulated over decades. He played with his grandchildren, telling them stories of the old days and carving them toys. He sat on the porch with Clara in the evenings, rocking in matching chairs, watching the sunset paint the mountains. "This is not so bad," he admitted one evening. "I thought I would hate slowing down, but there is peace in it too." "You have earned your rest," Clara said, taking his hand. "You have worked hard your entire life, built something remarkable. It is time to enjoy the fruits of that labor." "I am enjoying them." Harrison squeezed her fingers. "Every day with you is a blessing, Clara. That has not changed." The years gentled them both. Harrison's heart remained stable as long as he took care of himself, though he had occasional bad days that reminded them both of his mortality. Clara developed arthritis in her hands, making sewing difficult, though she refused to give it up entirely. Their bodies might be aging, but their love remained strong. In 1910, Rose married a fellow teacher, a kind man named David Hamilton. The wedding was held in Salt Lake City, and the whole family attended. Watching his daughter in her white dress, Harrison felt the weight of time passing, but it was a gentle weight, bittersweet rather than sad. Thomas graduated from college with honors and announced his intention to attend law school. Harrison and Clara could not have been prouder. Their youngest child was going to do great things. They were certain of it. Only Lily remained unmarried, focused entirely on her medical studies. She faced discrimination and obstacles at every turn, but she persevered with a stubbornness she had inherited from both her parents. When she finally earned her medical degree in 1912, Clara cried tears of joy. Her daughter was a doctor, something that would have been unthinkable when Clara was young. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1911, Henry and Sarah threw a grand party at the ranch. Friends and family came from all over, filling the house and spilling out into the yard. There was music and dancing, abundant food and drink, and speeches celebrating the couple of honor. Harrison stood with Clara in the center of it all, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love. These people, this community, had become their extended family over the years. The journey from that desperate winter night to this moment of joy had been long and sometimes difficult, but every step had been worth it. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked, reading his expression. "I am thinking about miracles," Harrison replied. "About how one decision to ride home a certain way on a winter night changed everything. About how finding you in the snow was the best thing that ever happened to me." "We saved each other," Clara said softly. "That night and every day since." They danced to the music of a hired band, moving slowly in each other's arms as they had done at their wedding 3 decades ago. Harrison was 61 now, Clara 54, their bodies marked by time but their hearts unchanged. When the song ended, they kissed to the applause and cheers of their children and grandchildren and friends. In the summer of 1914, the world erupted into war in Europe. The United States would not enter the conflict for several more years, but the news was troubling. Harrison watched Thomas, now 24 and finishing law school, and worried about what the future might bring. But that was beyond his control. All he could do was cherish each day with his family and hope for peace. Little Margaret, Henry's eldest daughter, was now 13 years old and showing signs of becoming a fine horsewoman. She reminded Harrison of Clara in her younger days, fearless and capable. The twin boys Harrison and Peter were 8, rambunctious and inseparable. Watching them play in the yard, Harrison felt his legacy secured. The ranch would continue, the family would continue long after he was gone, but he was not ready to be gone yet. Despite his heart troubles, he felt reasonably healthy, and he had too much to live for to give up easily. Every sunrise was precious, every meal with Clara a gift, every grandchild's laugh a treasure. On a crisp October evening in 1915, Harrison and Clara sat on their porch wrapped in blankets against the chill. The mountains were dusted with the first snow of the season, glowing pink in the last light of day. 34 years had passed since the blizzard that brought them together, but the memory was as fresh as yesterday. "You have any regrets?" Clara asked suddenly. Harrison turned to look at her, this woman who had been his partner for more than 3 decades. Her hair was completely silver now, her face lined with years, but her green eyes were as bright and intelligent as ever. She was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Not a single one," he said firmly. "Everything I have experienced, good and bad, led me to you and to this life. How could I regret any of it? I feel the same way." Clara smiled, that warm smile that still made his heart skip. "The winter left me homeless and desperate, but it brought me to you. To this family, this ranch, this love. I would not change a moment of it." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied, and Clara heard the voices of their grandchildren playing before bed. These sounds of home, of family, of life continuing, this was everything they had built together. "Thank you," Harrison said quietly, "for falling in the snow in front of me that night." Clara laughed, that bright, joyful sound he had first fallen in love with. "Thank you for saying your hearth was mine for as long as I needed it." "It still is," Harrison said, reaching for her hand. "It always will be." As winter settled over the Utah mountains once again, the Jameson ranch stood strong against the cold, its hearth warm and its rooms filled with love. Inside, multiple generations gathered for dinner, their voices mingling in laughter and conversation. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and silent, transforming the landscape into something pristine and beautiful. Harrison and Clara sat at the head of the table, their children and grandchildren surrounding them, and they smiled at each other across the food and candlelight. The journey from that desperate winter night to this moment had been longer and richer than either could have imagined. But every step had been taken together, hand in hand, heart to heart. The years continued forward as they always do, bringing both joy and sorrow in equal measure. In 1918, Thomas married Anna Peterson, a young woman he met while working at a law firm in Salt Lake City. The ceremony was small and intimate, held at the ranch on a beautiful May afternoon. Clara watched her youngest son exchange vows and felt the bittersweet pang of letting go. But she liked Anna, appreciated her sharp mind and kind heart, and she was glad Thomas had found love. That same year, Lily finally opened her own medical practice in Salt Lake City, specializing in women's and children's health. She remained unmarried, declaring herself perfectly content with her work and independence. Clara worried about her daughter being alone, but Harrison pointed out that Lily had chosen her own path and seemed genuinely happy with it. Not everyone needed marriage to feel complete. The influenza pandemic that swept the world in 1918 touched their community as well. Several neighbors fell ill, and 2 died. The Jameson family was fortunate they all survived, though young Peter, Henry's son, developed pneumonia and frightened everyone badly before recovering. During those tense weeks when the boy's life hung in the balance, Clara saw her own fear reflected in Henry's eyes. The terror of potentially losing a child transcended generations, but Peter recovered, and life returned to normal. The war in Europe finally ended, bringing relief and celebration. Thomas's law practice began to thrive. Henry and Sarah welcomed their 4th child, a daughter they named Clara in honor of her grandmother. At the christening, Clara held her tiny namesake and felt the circle of life complete itself once more. Harrison was 70 years old now, his body frail in ways it had never been before. He moved slowly, tired easily, spent most of his days sitting on the porch or in his favorite chair by the fire. But his mind remained sharp, and his eyes still tracked Clara wherever she went, full of the same love that had burned there for nearly 4 decades. Clara was 63, her own body bearing the marks of age and hard work. But she remained active, refusing to slow down more than necessary. She still cooked and cleaned, still walked to visit Henry and Sarah's family, still tended the garden that provided vegetables for their table. Movement kept her young, she claimed, though Harrison teased her that stubbornness was what really kept her going. On their 38th wedding anniversary in March of 1919, they celebrated quietly at home with just their immediate family. Harrison was having a good day, feeling stronger than he had in weeks. He even danced with Clara in the kitchen after dinner, humming the tune since they had no music. Their children and grandchildren watched with misty eyes, seeing the enduring love between their parents and grandparents. 38 years, Harrison murmured against Clara's ear as they swayed together. It went so fast. Not fast enough, Clara replied. I want another 38 years with you. I am not sure I have that many left in me, Harrison said with wry humor. Then I will take whatever you can give me. Clara pulled back to look into his eyes. 1 more year, 1 more month, 1 more day, I will be grateful for every moment. You have my heart until my last breath, Harrison promised. And if there is anything after, you will have it then too. The summer of 1920 was beautiful, warm and green without the oppressive heat of some years. Harrison spent his days on the porch, watching the ranch operate around him. He could no longer participate actively, but he took satisfaction in seeing how well Henry had taken over, how the ranch continued to prosper. Everything he had built would outlast him. That brought him peace. In August, little Clara, now almost 2 years old, took her first steps while visiting her grandparents. Harrison laughed with pure delight as the tiny girl toddled toward him, her face scrunched in concentration. When she reached him, he scooped her into his lap, kissing her chubby cheeks and calling for Clara to come see. These small moments had become precious to him, bright spots in days that sometimes felt long and difficult. The simple joy of a grandchild learning to walk, of Clara's smile across the breakfast table, of the sun warm on his face, these were the things that mattered. On a September evening, Harrison and Clara sat together watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange and purple, the mountains dark silhouettes against the vivid color. Harrison felt a deep peace settle over him, a sense of completion. "Clara," he said softly, taking her hand, "if something happens to me, I need you to know you made my life worth living. These years with you have been the greatest gift I could have received." "Stop talking like that," Clara said, though her voice trembled. "You are not going anywhere." "We all go somewhere eventually," Harrison replied gently. "I am 70 years old, my love. I have lived longer than I had any right to expect, and I have been happy beyond measure. But I need you to promise me that if I go first, you will not give up. You will keep living, keep finding joy." For me, tears streamed down Clara's face. "How can I live without you? You are my whole world." "I am not your whole world. Your children are part of your world, and your grandchildren, this ranch, this life we built. You are stronger than you know, Clara. You survived losing everything and starting over once. If you have to do it again, I know you can." "I do not want to," Clara sobbed. "I know." Harrison pulled her close, holding her as she cried. "I do not want to leave you either, but we have had 39 years together, Clara. 39 years of love and laughter and building this beautiful life. Some people never get even 1 year of what we have had. We have been blessed." They sat together until the stars came out, holding each other, memorizing the feel and scent and presence of the other. Neither spoke the fear that hung between them, but both felt it. Time was running short. Harrison made it through the fall and into winter. The cold bothered him more than it used to, settling into his bones and making him ache. Clara kept the fires burning high and wrapped him in blankets, but still he shivered. Dr. Williams visited regularly, his expression growing more concerned with each visit, though he said little. Christmas of 1920 was a grand affair. All 4 of Harrison and Clara's children came home, bringing spouses and grandchildren. The house overflowed with noise and activity, with children running through the rooms and adults catching up on news. A large tree stood in the parlor, decorated with strings of popcorn and handmade ornaments, presents piled beneath it. Harrison sat in his chair by the fire, wrapped in a quilt Clara had made years ago, and watched his family celebrate. Henry and Sarah's 4 children, ranging from 19-year-old Margaret down to 2-year-old Clara. Rose and David's 3 children, all under 10 years old. Thomas and Anna's infant son, born just 3 months ago. 15 grandchildren in total, a legacy beyond anything he had imagined. Clara caught him watching and came to sit on the arm of his chair, her hand resting on his shoulder. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I am the luckiest man who ever lived," Harrison replied. "Look at what we created, Clara. All these beautiful people, all this love. It started with you and me, and look how it has grown." "You are crying," Clara said softly, touching his wet cheek. "I am happy," Harrison said. "So very happy." After Christmas dinner, the family gathered in the parlor and insisted Harrison tell stories of the old days. The grandchildren loved his tales of training wild horses and facing down outlaws. But the story they loved most was the one about how he found their grandmother in the snow. "It was the coldest night of the year," Harrison began, his voice still strong when he spoke of the past. "The blizzard was so fierce I could barely see my horse's ears in front of me. I was riding home from town, eager to get out of the weather, when I saw something dark in the snow ahead. At first I thought it was a fallen tree branch, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person." The children leaned forward, even though they had heard this story many times. Clara listened too, smiling at the memory. "I jumped off my horse and found a woman lying in the snow, nearly frozen to death. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even half dead from cold." Harrison looked at Clara with such love that several of the adults in the room had to wipe their eyes. "I picked her up and carried her home, and I knew in that moment that my life had just changed forever. I did not know her name or where she came from, but I knew she was important." "And then what happened?" asked one of the youngest grandchildren, as though the ending was not already known. "Then I told her my hearth was hers for as long as she needed it," Harrison said. "And she never left. She became my wife, the love of my life, the mother of my children. That one night, that one moment of finding her in the snow, gave me everything I hold dear." "That is the most romantic story ever," Margaret sighed. "It is a true story," Clara said, "and the best part is that it kept getting better. Every day with your grandfather has been a gift." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Harrison suffered another heart episode. This one was worse than previous attacks, the pain crushing and relentless. Clara held him and prayed, and slowly the pain receded. But they both knew what it meant. His time was running out. "I am not ready to let you go," Clara whispered in the darkness. "I am not ready to go," Harrison replied. "But we do not always get to choose. Clara, you have to promise me you will be all right." "How can I promise that? Because you are the strongest person I know. Because you survived before we met, and you will survive after I am gone. Because our children and grandchildren will need you." Harrison's hand found hers in the dark. "Promise me." "I promise," Clara said through her tears, "but I will never stop missing you." "Good," Harrison said with a ghost of his old humor. "I would hate to be easily forgotten." Harrison lived through January and into February, defying the doctor's expectations. He was determined to reach their 39th anniversary in March, and Clara watched him fight for every day with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. He was so weak now, barely able to rise from bed, but his spirit remained unbroken. On March 8, 1921, exactly 39 years after their wedding day, Harrison woke feeling stronger than he had in weeks. Clara helped him dress, and they spent the morning together by the fire, reminiscing about their years together. Henry and his family came to visit, bringing food and gifts. It was a quiet celebration, but it was perfect. That evening, after everyone had left, Harrison asked Clara to dance with him. She protested that he was too weak, but he insisted. They stood in the middle of their bedroom, barely swaying, Clara supporting most of his weight. But they were together, moving to music only they could hear, and it was enough. "I love you," Harrison said against her hair. "I have loved you from the moment I pulled you from the snow. I will love you until the end of time." "I love you too," Clara whispered, "more than words can express." "You gave me everything, Harrison. Everything." They stood there swaying until Harrison's strength gave out and Clara had to help him back to bed. She lay down beside him fully clothed, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. It was erratic and weak, but it was still beating. He was still here. "Do not be afraid," Harrison murmured, his hand stroking her silver hair. "We will find each other again somehow. This is not the end." "It feels like the end," Clara said, her tears soaking his nightshirt. "It is just the end of one chapter. There will be more, I promise you." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms as they had been for nearly 40 years. And when Clara woke in the dim light of dawn, she knew immediately that Harrison was gone. His chest was still beneath her cheek, his hand still in her hair, but the essence of him, the spirit that had animated his body, had slipped away during the night. Clara did not cry out or panic. She simply lay there holding him as the sun rose, memorizing the feel of him one last time. Then she kissed his forehead, his cheeks, his lips, whispering her love and her goodbye. The funeral was held 3 days later. It seemed the entire county turned out to pay respects to Harrison Jameson, respected rancher and beloved friend. The church was packed, people standing in the aisles and spilling out into the yard. One by one, friends and neighbors spoke about Harrison's integrity, his kindness, his skill with horses, his devotion to his family. But it was Clara's eulogy that brought everyone to tears. She stood at the front of the church, her children beside her for support, and spoke from her heart. 39 years ago, my husband saved my life, she began, her voice steady despite her grief. I was dying in the snow, and he pulled me back from the edge. He brought me to his home and told me his hearth was mine for as long as I needed it. What he gave me that night was more than shelter. He gave me hope and love and a reason to keep living. He gave me a family and a home and happiness beyond measure. Harrison was the best man I have ever known, and I was blessed beyond words to be his wife. Her voice broke then, and she had to pause to compose herself. Henry put his arm around her shoulders, and she drew strength from his presence. Harrison told me not to give up when he was gone, she continued. He made me promise to keep living, to keep finding joy. It is the hardest promise I have ever had to make, because living without him seems impossible. But I will keep that promise because he asked me to, because our love deserves that. I will live for him, and for our children, and for all the grandchildren he adored. And every day until I see him again, I will carry him in my heart, grateful for the miracle that brought us together on a cold winter night so many years ago. Clara did keep her promise, though there were dark days when she wanted nothing more than to join Harrison wherever he had gone. She remained at the ranch, helping Henry and Sarah however she could, watching her grandchildren grow. The grief never truly left, but it gradually transformed from sharp agony to a gentle ache, always present but bearable. She lived for 20 more years, long enough to see her family continue to grow and flourish. Henry took over the ranch completely and expanded it even further, becoming one of the most successful ranchers in the state. Rose remained a dedicated teacher, touching hundreds of young lives. Lily's medical practice thrived, and she became known as one of the best doctors in Salt Lake City. Thomas entered politics as Harrison had predicted, eventually becoming a state senator known for his integrity and fairness. Clara saw 23 great-grandchildren born, each one a precious gift. She told them all stories of their great-grandfather Harrison, keeping his memory alive for new generations. She showed them the cradle he had carved for their father or mother, the rocking horse he had made, the ranch he had built from nothing. On March 8, 1941, exactly 20 years after Harrison's death and 60 years after their wedding, Clara Whitmore Jameson passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 84 years old. Her children found her in the morning lying in the bed she had shared with Harrison, a smile on her face, holding the worn quilt he used to wrap her in on cold nights. The family buried her beside Harrison in the cemetery overlooking the ranch they had built together. On the shared headstone, Henry had inscribed the words that had brought them together. The winter left her homeless. He said his hearth was hers. Together they built a love that outlasted time. The Jameson Ranch continues to this day, passed down through generations. each one adding their own chapter to the story Harrison and Clara began. The original house still stands, carefully maintained and updated but retaining its essential character. The barn where Harrison trained his horses has been replaced, but pieces of the original wood were saved and incorporated into the new structure. And on cold winter nights when snow falls soft and silent over the Utah mountains, some say you can still feel the warmth of that hearth Harrison offered to a freezing woman so long ago. A warmth that never faded, a love that never died, a story that became legend in a family built on the foundation of one cowboy's kindness and one woman's courage to accept it.